This special budget discussion countdown is brought to you in partnership with Action Aid Zambia, Civil Society for Poverty Reduction, Center for Trade Policy and Development, Consumer Unit Trust Society, and the Policy Monitoring and Research Center.
On Friday, the 29th of September 2017, Finance Minister Felix Mutati will be presenting the Patriotic Front financial plan for the year 2018. The discussion around the 2018 national budget will start before the conclusion of the 2017 national budget. This is Nightlife. We'll take a break.
This special budget discussion countdown is brought to you in partnership with Action Aid Zambia, Civil Society for Poverty Reduction, Center for Trade Policy and Development, Consumer Unit Trust Society, and the Policy Monitoring and Research Center.
Welcome back. Our discussion is centered on the budget review as well as expectation of what to look forward to in the 2018 national budget. Our guest tonight is Policy Monitoring and Research Center Head of Research and Analysis, Salim Kaunda. Welcome to Night Live, the budget edition.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. So the national budget for 2018 will be presented on the 29th of September. Yeah. What was PMRC's role before and during the implementation of the budget for 2017?
Great, thank you so much. So before the 2017 national budget, actually, we were involved with expectations. We had to take forth our expectations as PMRC on what we felt was supposed to be in the 2017 national budget. We looked at the economic sectors, tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, energy, and construction sector as well, and we provided our submissions and how government was supposed to utilize those funds to achieve our economic objectives. So we did that. That was before the budget. We also were part of the consultative process of the budget. And then after the budget was actually presented, so then we appeared before the parliamentary committees, the estimates committee, the budgetary committee, to now analyze the budget in detail. Because I'm sure you're aware, once the minister delivers a speech in parliament, it has to go for debate. So we were part of that process as well, appearing before the parliamentary committees. We produced several infographics to help the public understand where has the money gone, how is the money going to be used. So that's how we did produce the infographics. We did a lot of press statements, op-eds, just to take the weight around there and empower the citizens to be able to know what amount of money has been allocated to what. So in that way, it really gives them power to engage with their leaders at different levels, to question government, for example, what about this money that is going to this sector or something like that. Okay. So we've been heavily involved before, during, and after as well.
Okay, but then how does that fit in your mandate as a public policy think tank?
Excellent. So for PMRC, we're a public policy think tank, and basically our vision is unlocking Zambia's potential. It's quite broad, but if you look at it, we want to be, the main institution people can go to get information of such nature, of the budget, the constitution, the 7th National Development Plan, development issues, policy issues as well. So we pride ourselves during the fact that we provide information to the citizenry, we analyze that information, and we also go on the other side, the government side, and ask the questions that the citizens are asking as well. So we are a very strategic institution as a public policy think tank, and basically we also want to upgrade the quality of debate in Zambia. If you look at the kind of information people are exposed to, so that's why we take time to digest this information and then provide it to the public as well. So that's where it fits into our mandate of being, this institution that is information-based, produces research, evidence-based research, and provides the information as well.
You were integral in very important aspects of the economy. You mentioned agriculture, tourism, energy, construction, as well as the manufacturing sector. But then after having given a review and what your expectation was for the 2017 national budget, how do you think it has performed in the sectors that I've mentioned?
Interesting question. I think it's performed fairly well, if you ask me. Of course, we know that the thrust for Zambia, therefore, is to move from mining to agriculture. So as we've been talking about agriculture, we've seen a lot with e-voucher. Many people have been hearing about the e-voucher. Basically, transforming from the FISP, FRI, to e-voucher, where the farmers would be given these cards that can be activated to actually have those inputs, because farmers are feeding the nation. So I think the thrust of the budget when the agriculture went to the e-voucher, rolling it out, increasing the number of people, the beneficiaries, and also others have been graduating from the e-voucher. Also, when you look at agriculture, we look at the fisheries side, the livestock side. So from the fisheries, we've been seeing that there's been the Fisheries Development Fund that was created with monies allocated to that to actually help people with, fingerlings and all these fish farms to grow that subsector. Because ultimately, if we want to move away from mining, we have to be ready to actually, sustain the agriculture sector. We've also seen with agriculture the issue of the irrigation schemes, increasing the amount of land under irrigation as well. That called for money from the budget as well. Developing vaccines, all these deep tanks as well. So that's where the thrust of the budget in agriculture went to. If you look at energy, of course, I can say Zambia wants to have a rich energy mix by 2020, away from hydro, moving into renewable energy and solar and all that kind of things. So the thrust of the budget, therefore, was to help actualize that rich energy mix. We've seen projects in solar. We've seen a lot of power plants that are actually being, established or developed right now. We've also seen renewable energy. They're developing a renewable energy plan that called for funds as well from the budget. If we look at manufacturing, of course, we've noticed a lot of the multi-facility economic zones. We have in Lusaka, the Lusaka South, which has actually, attracted a lot of investments. And that's what the country needs if a country is to industrialize. Kalumbila and Northwestern, the same is happening. Kafio, we have the Kafio iron and steel multi-facility economic zones in the Copper Belt. So you can see that the money from the budget was actually allocated to those ventures that are purported to actually grow the economy.
But then there was a bit of a challenge when it comes to the agriculture sector. You mentioned the e-voucher system, which is part of the Farmer Input Support Program. Now, there were some farmers who had heavy complaints as to having either at least received the inputs late or not received them at all.
Exactly.
Could this be a typical budgeting problem that we were experiencing, or is it basically the implementation of the system that we were seeing shortcomings with?
Oh, I wouldn't call it a budgeting problem. I think that was part of the implementation of the technical aspect of the e-voucher, because you're aware that 13 districts were piloted with the e-voucher and how it would work. Now, the way the card works, you have to activate it. That costs for internet, and the ICTs come into play. So 13 districts were strategically selected to actually see what challenges people face in those different districts. And it was unique because we also appeared before Parliament to give our views after having gone to meet some of the farmers in those districts. And we understood that it was not really a budget issue, but the technical aspect, maybe the card was not activating due to maybe internet itself. And maybe sometimes if we say the inputs came in late, it was also because of the same card. So I wouldn't really call it a budgeting issue, but more of an implementation technical issue, because we have got these spending agencies now that have to actualize, money from the budget into tangible, services for the people.
We do remember vividly Finance Minister, as he was presenting the 2017 national budget, speaking of what was described as the Zambia Economic Recovery Plan, or as he dubbed it, Zambia Plus, with 5 pillars on restoring the economy and bringing credibility in the budget. How would you advise government to continue with the recovery program in the 2018 budget, which will be presented on the 29th?
Yeah, very, very interesting, actually. I think one of the unique features of last year's budget, of course, was that it was implemented side by side the Zambia Plus, or Zambia Economic Recovery Program, that had 5 pillars of what it would take to actually recover Zambia's economy. So we had issues of domestic resource mobilization as one of the pillars. Of course, we know that the bulk of the budget was meant to be funded by, the taxes that government collects. So the question therefore was, how can government actually come up with strategies to ensure that there is effective collection of taxes? So we can see that they've come up with measures such as electronic gadgets that will be used to collect tax, to ensure that as many people as possible are able to pay tax. And that's why one of the pillars, the other one is social cash transfer. Of course, we know that government wants to help the less privileged in society, the vulnerable households. So it's aiming to increase the number of beneficiaries, the amount allocated per month to those households, to actually equip them and help them as well. We looked at issues of minimizing unplanned expenditures. That was very key. I think if you notice the previous budgets, critics used to say budget would be put in place, but then there would be unplanned expenditure of allocating money to things that are not in the budget. So government came up with those pillars to actually say, from now onwards, whatever should be done in Zambia should have a line in the budget or in the yellow book itself. So we saw that as another pillar. And I think also the other one was, of course, minimizing unplanned expenditure. I mentioned that, and the policy consistency as well. So policy consistency sends out waves to the market, to the investors, and policy consistency affects the budget. If the government policy is not consistent, implementation of the budget will be affected. So those are some of the pillars that government came up with in the Zambia Plus to send right signals to the economy, to the market, to the investors, to say, we have put these 5 pillars and we believe that if we work according to these 5 pillars, then the implementation of the budget will actually go smoothly.
So this was a projection of what is going to happen as we're heading into 2017, but it was only a projection as part of the budget. Would you suggest that we've stuck to the values that were enshrined in the Zambia Economic Recovery Program?
I think so. There is room for improvement, I would say so. And we as PMRC definitely would advise the government to continue with that, because we feel that those 5 pillars are still key, even with the 2018 national budget. Mind you, the 2018 national budget will be implemented side by side the 7 NDP. Now, a 7 NDP has been allocated. It has to be funded by this budget. Of course, it's a 5-year program. So without a Zambia Plus of 5 pillars that I mentioned, actually, it becomes difficult to actually implement the budget. So we would advise government to continue with these pillars, because we believe that if these pillars are being implemented side by side, the budget and the 7 NDP, then we would be on our way to 2030 and our aspirations would be met.
The medium-term expenditure framework, also called the Green Paper, has been released and provides insight into financial planning for the next 3 years. We'll be talking about that after this break. This is Nightlife. Our guest is PMRC's Salim Kaunda, and we will be discussing the 2018 national budget expectations, among other things, on this special budget edition of Nightlife. We'll be back.
This special budget discussion countdown is brought to you in partnership with Action Aid Zambia, Civil Society for Poverty Reduction, Center for Trade Policy and Development, Consumer Unit Trust Society, and the Policy Monitoring and Research Center.
Welcome back. This is Nightlife. We continue discussing the expectations of the 2018 national budget, as well as a review of the 2017 national budget. Now, before the break, I did mention the medium-term expenditure framework, also called the Green Paper, which we will call it that way now. It has been released and provides insight on the financial planning for the next 3 years. We know that it will inform the 2018 national budget. It has a guide on the 2018 national budget. What is your general comment on the Green Paper?
Okay, great. I think generally the Green Paper provides projections for the next 3 years, 2018, 19, 20, on how actually the budgets will be implemented and how the fiscal governance of Zambia will be. So, of course, what we notice from the MTF is that it provides various reforms that will be what will happen in this same 3-year period. So we're talking of structural reforms, we're talking of commitment reforms to ensure that every ministry, every spending agency is part of that commitment form to say whatever we shall do as a ministry would have a budget line in the national budget, also in the yellow book itself. We look at decentralization. It's been heavily pronounced in the MTF. Of course, I know people are tired of hearing decentralization, but I must say that I think to some extent it takes steps. It's happening. In this budget, of course, I know from the MTF that we're going to see some powers from the center here in Lusaka will move to the periphery. Fiscal centralization actually also will be affected, where some powers, financial powers, will also be given to those people in the periphery as well. So we've seen a lot of centralization. We've seen a lot of issue of clearing the arrears for people, the contractors that government owes money to. Without doing that, interest rates will continue to grow. As a result, government would want to offer development, but it has got a large chunk of people whom it owes. As a result, government would find itself in a situation where instead of allocating money for development, it actually has to pay the arrears. So government has actually looked at those issues that might hinder proper implementation of the budget. And that's why we've seen a lot of the issue of arrears as well. So government will be clearing that as well. But the MTF generally provides a positive outlook. It's in line with the 7 NDP. That's one thing that is, I think, a very positive thing. We have taken time to understand the 7 NDP, who are part of the people that were actually, included in the process of formulating the 7 NDP. So we understand the new format of planning, and we've seen that the MTF is responsive to the 7 NDP, meaning that in the next 3 to 5 years, the MTF has provided even the finance modalities of the 7 NDP and the budget. So to that effect, it's very positive, and I'm sure we also as PMRC would be part of that process to ensure that we can complement whatever needs to be done from our part as a public policy.
Speaking of complementing, just recently President Edgar Lungu launched the 7th National Development Plan, which provides a guide on development between 2017 and 2021. How do you feel the 2018 national budget is going to complement the efforts that are enshrined in this development plan?
Yeah, very interesting actually. So if you look at the 7 NDP, like I mentioned, it's a very unique document. It's using an integrated development approach. It's different from the 6th and the 5th NDP. So it has what we're calling development outcomes. So with these development outcomes, 4-5 ministries are now supposed to work together towards a development outcome. In this case, I can give an example, maybe let's say mortality rate. So Ministry of Health, Education, Community Development are supposed to work together to actualize that. So now the unique thing is that the funding should be very strategic. If 3 or 4 ministries are working towards a development outcome, how is the funding going to be allocated for all those ministries working towards a common goal? In the past, it's been funding an institution, funding a spending agency. So in this case, definitely, when we talk about complementing, I think we would feel that the budget this year should be responsive to the new and unique approach that has been used in the 7 NDP. Because the 7 NDP shifts away from the traditional approach of planning. I think even when the president was opening parliament, he said, let us do away with models that have failed us as a nation. Let us open up our minds and go to new ways of planning. So the 7 NDP has taken that approach. Therefore, the budget should follow suit. So we expect that in some way, maybe through the cluster groups, the budget should now be responsive to fund those development outcomes. There are quite a number of them laid out in the 7 NDP. If the budget is not responsive to the development outcomes, it might be a bit difficult to implement or to actualize that, because it brings different stakeholders to work towards a common good, be it in agriculture, in tourism, in community development, in all the other sectors. So that's what we feel is the key in terms of how the budget should be responsive. But we're also alive to the fact that Secretary to the Treasury has been meeting the cluster groups. I'm sure you're aware that not so long ago they were inducted at provincial level, national level. So Secretary to the Treasury has been meeting with them to see what their needs are, what their budgeting needs are, and it will be put in alignment with the budget that will be presented soon. So that's one observation that we're waiting to see the moment the budget is actually presented before Parliament.
Okay, speaking of the things that you expect to see as the budget is presented to Parliament, what are your major expectations as the PMRC with regards to the budget that is yet to be presented?
Very interesting question, very broad. I don't know which angle I'll take, but of course I'll look at the thrust of the economy. We are saying we want to be an agriculture-oriented economy. The president has emphasized that. So, of course, when you look at the allocations, definitely in agriculture itself, I think we expect to see a little bit much more with the e-voucher itself. I'll still emphasize that, because if we want agri to be the anchor of the economy, we should have ventures that are going to grow this sector, be it from the e-voucher side, livestock. How do we look after our livestock? Vaccines, deep tanks. So we expect to see more funds allocated to such that will grow the agriculture sector. If you look at manufacturing as well, we've been talking about Zambia being a manufacturing hub in the southern region. We have the MFAs, the multi-facility economic zones. We believe it's one avenue, but definitely we should also look at ventures that will promote this value addition that everyone talks about. We produce quite a lot in Zambia in terms of resources. We have the resources. Mostly we export things in raw form, and as a result, we've not been getting as much as we are supposed to get. So if we look at transforming those resources into finished goods, it will call for industries, it will call for empowering institutions such as the Zambia Association of Manufacturers, access to financing for SMEs. We expect in the 2017, we saw that there was amounts of money allocated for emergent farmers, for the SMEs. We expect to see the same this year. A little bit more increase in terms of allocation, because we know that the SMEs also play a critical role in the economy. So if they have access to finance, definitely they would be able to achieve that. Tourism, we can go on. The Northern Circuit should be developed. We've seen the Luapula Expo. We expect such to be replicated in all the other provinces to grow the tourism sector. I'm focusing on the economic sectors because we feel that's where much impact can be actually be made. And I think the other sectors can tap on from those as well. Construction, we've continued as well. We know the story. So generally, increased amounts of, not so much because we know there's issues of a budget deficit as well. So we have to be careful about how we channel these resources, but also promote domestic resource mobilization. It's very key.
I do know that earlier on you had mentioned budget adherence, and I think it's a major problem that we're facing because tracking and constant reporting has been a big challenge in the past. So as a policy or a public policy think tank, how best do you think we can drive towards budget adherence? Because it is one thing to have a concern that we are not adhering to the budget, but it's another to actually adhere to the budget. So what should be the benchmark when it comes to adherence to what is budgeted for?
Very good question and very tricky as well. So if you look at the Auditor General's report, it actually spells out areas which are being abused in terms of finances. There are certain themes that come every year. And so as a budget, we've noticed that adherence and tracking has been a challenge to some extent. And even when we appeared before Parliament, we took those submissions to say there should be a strategy of a quarterly or mid-year report from the Ministry of Finance. Okay, what happens in Zambia is usually the minister will provide the budget, then there will be reports here and there, but we want something as official as that to come and give updates of how much allocation, how much monies have been spent, where have they been spent, and what have been the results. If there's constant communication, then the M&D actually can be affected. But if there's no information, M&D will be a challenge. So looking at that as well, we know that the Public Finance Act from the Parliament side itself is also being reviewed, where the Secretary of the Treasury will be given much more power to deal with people who actually abuse these funds. This is public funds, and the people who actually use these funds should be meant to account for that money. What's been happening is that the Auditor General's report will come out, people will be called before Parliament, Public Accounts Committee, and they'll present their views. Now I want to take it a step further. There should be more that happens after that, because sometimes we've been part of that and we've been not impressed with some spending agencies, because they would say, I was not in office when this happened. But that's public funds. At the end of the day, we want those funds to actually bring about development in Zambia. So we are very pleased with the reforms of the Public Finance Act, because we believe that it will bring a lot of strict measures that will help promote adherence and tracking the budget as well. Then also, with the 7 NDP, we know that there are cluster groups that have been set up. So within those cluster groups, they would be reporting of the spending agencies who will be coming to report to those clusters how the money has been used. So we feel that it's an effective mechanism, because it's like everyone who receives money from the budget at some point will be made to appear before the cluster groups and explain. So we've seen that there are mid-term strategies that have come in place, and definitely they would work.
And then finally, as we get to conclude our discussion, government wants to borrow over $1 billion from the International Monetary Fund. Do you believe that this is necessary when we talked of mines owing government probably just as much?
The IMF issue, of course, look, many nations actually do borrow, depending on what your aspirations are as a country. So we cannot say Zambia is exempted from that, provided we have a plan on how to pay back, provided we as Zambians set the tone or the modalities of how that transaction will be. And I believe that's why we see that the talks are still ongoing, because Zambia wants the Zambia Plus we talked about to be the thrust of development. So even if we engage with the IMF, probably Zambia will tell them these are the 5 pillars we want to work around with. So if IMF is to bring in funds, it has to be ready to fund this. If it can't fund this, then I think that's why there's been challenges. So of course, we should look at other means. Of course, we have a debt strategy now, we know. Government does not borrow anyhow. It has to go to Parliament and stuff like that. There's options of China as well, but we know that China financing is usually through projects and road construction. So if we need the cash or the money actually to offer this development, then definitely we can borrow to some extent. But then I believe that we should have a plan on how to repay back. We should have a plan on what that money will be used. Let's focus on the productive side of the economy than the consumptive side. And I think that should be the key for the government, definitely.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
This has been Nightlife, and my guest has been coming in from one of our partners on this budget edition of Nightlife Policy Monitoring and Research Center, and that is Salim Kaunda, who is the head of research and analysis. My name is Dinginda Bajona Buyoya. Good night.
This special budget discussion countdown was brought to you in partnership with Action Aid Zambia, Civil Society for Poverty Reduction, Center for Trade Policy and Development, Consumer Unit Trust Society, and the Policy Monitoring and Research Center.